To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Marcus Weiss stood in his mahogany-paneled office on the 42nd floor, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a chessboard waiting for his next move. At 51, he had built an empire from nothing, a private security consulting firm that served Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. His reputation was built on two pillars: absolute loyalty to those who earned it, and complete destruction of those who betrayed it. The silver-framed photograph on his desk showed three faces: himself, his wife Linda of 28 years, and their daughter Heather, 26 and radiant in her graduation gown. Linda Saunders had been 22 when they met, a small-town girl from Ohio with dreams bigger than her hometown could contain. Marcus, then 25 and hungry for success, had seen something in her amber eyes that promised partnership, loyalty, and shared ambition. "You're going to conquer the world," Linda had whispered to him on their wedding night in a modest ceremony her parents had scraped together the money for. "And I'll be right beside you." For 26 years, she had been. Through the lean early years when Marcus worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination. Through the breakthrough that came when he uncovered a corporate espionage ring that had been bleeding a tech company dry, a case that launched his firm into the stratosphere. Through Heather's childhood, her rebellious teenage years, and her eventual graduation from Stanford with a business degree, Marcus had given them everything. The sprawling estate in Connecticut with its 8 bedrooms, an Olympic-sized pool, the vacation home in the Hamptons, private schools, luxury cars, and a lifestyle that most people could only dream of. But more than material wealth, he had given them his unwavering dedication. Every business decision was made with his family in mind. Every sacrifice was for their future. Linda had played her part perfectly. The dutiful wife at corporate events, the supportive mother at school functions, the loving partner who would massage his shoulders after particularly stressful days. She had style, grace, and an intuitive understanding of high society dynamics that had made her an invaluable asset to his business dealings. Heather had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's sharp mind. Marcus had watched with pride as she navigated Stanford's competitive environment, excelling in her studies while building the kind of connections that would serve her well in life. She was supposed to be his legacy, the one who would eventually take over the family business and carry the Weiss name forward. But Marcus Weiss had not built his empire by being naive about human nature. His work had shown him the darkest sides of people, how greed, lust, and ambition could transform seemingly loyal individuals into calculating betrayers. He had always told himself that his family was different. They were his sanctuary, the one place where trust was absolute and love was unconditional. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Weiss, your wife is here to see you," his assistant announced. "Send her in," Marcus replied, straightening his tie and preparing to discuss their upcoming weekend plans. Linda entered with her usual confident stride, but something was different. Her designer dress was perfectly chosen, her makeup flawless, her smile bright. Yet Marcus's trained eye caught the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her gaze didn't quite meet his. "Hello, darling," she said, crossing to give him a kiss on the cheek. "I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I wanted to discuss Heather's engagement party. The caterer needs to know the final head count by Thursday." They talked for 20 minutes about flowers, seating arrangements, and wine selections. Normal, domestic conversations that should have felt comfortable and familiar. But Marcus found himself studying his wife's face, noting the micro-expressions that his years of reading people had taught him to recognize. The slight tightness around her eyes when she mentioned certain guests. The way her fingers drummed against her purse when discussing the timeline. After Linda left, Marcus sat in his leather chair, staring out at the city again. Something was wrong. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what, but 30 years of investigating human deception had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. The woman who had just left his office wasn't quite the same woman who had kissed him goodbye that morning. That evening, Marcus decided to trust his instincts. It was a decision that would change everything. Chapter 2. The Wedding Gift. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the ornate ballroom of the Riverside Country Club, watching his daughter Heather dance with her new husband, Christian Robertson. The wedding had been everything Linda had dreamed of: 500 guests, a 7-tier cake, and flowers that had cost more than most people's annual salary. Marcus had written the check for $80,000 without hesitation, seeing the joy in his daughter's eyes as she planned her perfect day. Christian was everything a father could want for his daughter on paper. 31 years old, Harvard MBA, a rising star at his father's investment firm. Tall, handsome, with the kind of easy charm that made people instantly comfortable. He had proposed to Heather with a 4-carat diamond ring and a promise to love her forever. But Marcus had noticed things about Christian during the engagement. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he talked about the future. How he always seemed to be calculating something behind his polished exterior. Most troubling were the small lies, claiming to be at work when he was somewhere else. Stories that didn't quite add up when Marcus applied his investigative skills. "She looks beautiful," Linda said, appearing at Marcus's side with a glass of champagne. She wore a stunning blue gown that complemented her still striking figure. At 48, she remained the kind of woman who turned heads when she entered a room. "She does," Marcus agreed, but his attention was divided. He was watching Christian's family, noting the expensive clothes and jewelry that didn't quite match what he knew about their supposed financial situation. He was cataloging the guest list, recognizing faces he had investigated in previous cases, people with questionable business practices and flexible morals. The first dance ended, and Heather approached them, radiant in her custom-designed gown. "Daddy, thank you so much for all of this. It's perfect." Marcus hugged his daughter, breathing in the scent of her perfume and feeling the familiar surge of protective love. "Nothing's too good for my princess." But even as he spoke the words, he noticed Christian approaching, his phone pressed to his ear. The conversation seemed intense, urgent. Marcus's lip-reading skills, honed through years of surveillance work, caught fragments. "Not now." "She doesn't know? Handle it later." The reception continued with its choreographed perfection. Speeches were given, toasts were raised, and Marcus played the role of the proud father flawlessly. But beneath the surface, his investigative mind was working, cataloging inconsistencies and filing away details for future analysis. It was during the cake cutting that Marcus noticed the look. A brief exchange between Linda and Christian, lasting no more than 3 seconds, but loaded with meaning. The kind of glance that passed between two people who shared secrets. Linda's hand briefly touched Christian's arm as they positioned themselves for photos, a gesture so subtle that no one else would have noticed. Marcus Weiss noticed everything. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and well wishes. Marcus smiled, shook hands, and accepted thanks for his generosity. But part of his mind was already working, planning how he would investigate what he had seen. 3 weeks later, Marcus had his answers. The private investigator he had hired was thorough, professional, and discreet. The photographs were clear, the timeline was established, and the evidence was irrefutable. Linda and Christian had been having an affair for 8 months. It had started during the engagement period, when Christian would come to the house to plan wedding details with Heather. Linda had been lonely, she would later claim. Marcus worked such long hours, and Christian was young, charming, and attentive. The photographs showed them entering a downtown hotel together. Credit card records revealed charges for romantic dinners and weekend getaways while Marcus was traveling on business. Phone records documented hundreds of calls and text messages, including explicit exchanges that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. But the most damaging evidence was the conversation the investigator had recorded at a coffee shop 2 days after the wedding. Linda and Christian, discussing their future together, making plans to leave their respective spouses once Christian's trust fund matured in 6 months. "Marcus will be devastated," Linda had said, stirring sugar into her latte. "But he'll survive. He's stronger than he looks. And Heather will get over it," Christian had replied. "She's young. She'll find someone else." They were talking about destroying 2 lives as casually as discussing the weather. Marcus sat in his office that night, the evidence spread across his desk like pieces of a puzzle that revealed a picture he never wanted to see. The betrayal cut deeper than he had thought possible. Not just the affair, but the calculated nature of it. The way they had used his love for his family as a weapon against him. For the first time in 30 years, Marcus Weiss allowed himself to feel the full weight of genuine hatred. 3 days later, Heather called him, sobbing. "Daddy, Christian left me. He said he never loved me, that he was only with me because of your money. He's with Mom now." There together, Marcus had listened to his daughter's broken voice, feeling something cold and final settle in his chest. "I'm sorry, Princess. I'm so sorry. I don't understand," Heather had whispered. "How could they do this to us?" Marcus had known he should comfort her, should be the strong father she needed. Instead, he had found himself analyzing her words, cataloging her reaction. Because something in her voice didn't sound surprised enough. Something in her tone suggested that she had known more than she was admitting. The final piece of the puzzle came 2 weeks later, when the investigator delivered his supplemental report. Heather had known about the affair for 3 months before the wedding. She had confronted her mother and been convinced to stay silent. Linda had promised that the affair would end after the wedding, that it was just pre-wedding jitters and confusion. But Heather had agreed to something else. In exchange for her silence, Linda had promised to share some of Marcus's assets when the divorce proceedings began. Mother and daughter had made a deal, planning to split the spoils of their betrayal. Marcus read that report in his office as the sun set over the city. When he finished, he carefully placed the documents in his safe, poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch, and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would give them exactly what they deserved. All of them. Chapter 3. The Phoenix Rises. Marcus Weiss had always been methodical, but heartbreak sharpened his natural precision into something surgical. The morning after receiving the final investigative report, he sat at his kitchen table, a kitchen that Linda had redesigned 3 times in 5 years, and began planning their destruction with the same careful attention he brought to corporate security assessments. The divorce proceedings were swift and ruthless. Marcus had anticipated every move, documented every asset, and prepared for every legal maneuver his wife's attorney might attempt. Linda discovered that her husband, the man she had taken for granted for 28 years, was not the predictable, work-obsessed pushover she had assumed. "You can't do this to me," Linda had screamed during one particularly heated exchange in their lawyer's office. "I gave you the best years of my life." Marcus had studied her across the mahogany conference table, noting how desperation had aged her. The careful makeup couldn't hide the stress lines, and the designer clothes couldn't disguise the way she clutched her purse like a lifeline. "You gave me 26 years of performance," he replied calmly. "The last 2 years were the real you." The prenuptial agreement Marcus had insisted on before their marriage held firm. Linda walked away with a modest settlement, enough to live comfortably, but nowhere near the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. The Connecticut estate, the Hampton house, the investment portfolio, and the business all remained with Marcus. Christian fared worse. Marcus had quietly purchased the debt on several of Christian's father's business ventures, then called those loans due simultaneously. The Robertson family investment firm collapsed within 3 months. Christian's trust fund, tied to the firm's performance, evaporated overnight. But Marcus was just getting started. His first strategic move was relocating to Seattle, a city where he had business connections, but no personal history. He sold the Connecticut estate to a developer who razed it immediately, ensuring that no trace of his former life remained. The gesture was both practical and symbolic. Marcus Weiss was burning his bridges and salting the earth behind him. The Seattle office of Weiss Security Consulting operated from a sleek downtown high-rise. Marcus threw himself into expanding the business, leveraging his reputation and connections to secure contracts with tech giants and aerospace companies. Within 18 months, his revenue had tripled. It was during this period of professional rebuilding that Marcus met Sandra Watson. Sandra was 38, a brilliant forensic accountant who had been hired to audit one of his clients' financial systems. She was nothing like Linda. Where Linda was polished and calculated, Sandra was genuine and sharp-witted. She wore minimal makeup, favored practical clothes over designer labels, and had built her career on competence rather than charm. Their first meeting was purely professional. Sandra had discovered irregularities in his client's books and needed Marcus's security expertise to determine if it was fraud or incompetence. They worked together for 3 weeks, analyzing patterns and building cases. "You're very thorough," Sandra had observed one evening as they reviewed documents in Marcus's office. "Most people would have stopped looking after finding the obvious problems." "Obvious problems usually hide bigger ones," Marcus had replied. "People who steal small amounts are usually practicing for larger thefts." Sandra had smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from a woman in months. "You think like a chess player, always thinking 3 moves ahead." Their working relationship evolved slowly into something more personal. Marcus was cautious, hyper-aware of his own vulnerability after Linda's betrayal. But Sandra's consistency gradually earned his trust. She never played games, never manipulated conversations for advantage, and never seemed interested in his wealth beyond what it represented about his professional success. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Marcus asked Sandra to dinner at a restaurant that wasn't trying to impress anyone with its pretensions. She accepted, and they talked for 4 hours about everything except their past relationships. Their courtship was measured and deliberate. Marcus had learned to read people too well to rush into emotional decisions. But Sandra proved herself repeatedly, offering professional advice without being asked, supporting his business decisions without expecting reciprocity, and maintaining her own successful practice without trying to merge their finances. When Marcus proposed, it was with a simple but elegant ring and a straightforward question. "Will you marry me and build something real together?" Sandra had laughed, the sound genuinely delighted. "I was wondering when you'd get around to asking." Their wedding was small, attended only by close friends and business associates. No elaborate reception, no 7-tier cake, no performance of social status. Just two people making promises they intended to keep. But even as Marcus rebuilt his personal life, he never forgot the promises he had made to himself. Linda, Christian, and Heather were living their new lives, believing they had escaped the consequences of their betrayal. Linda had moved to a modest apartment in the suburbs, working as a real estate agent and dating men who couldn't afford her previous lifestyle. Christian was struggling to rebuild his career, taking entry-level positions and accumulating debt. Heather had moved back in with her mother, her Stanford degree apparently insufficient to land her the kind of job she expected. Marcus monitored their lives through carefully placed contacts and strategic information gathering. Not stalking. He was too smart for anything that crude, but maintaining awareness. He knew when Linda's car broke down and she couldn't afford repairs. He knew when Christian was rejected for a loan to start his own business. He knew when Heather applied for jobs that paid less than her monthly student loan payments. They were struggling, but they were surviving. That wasn't enough for Marcus Weiss. He wanted them to understand exactly what they had lost. He wanted them to face consequences that matched the magnitude of their betrayal. And he wanted them to know, beyond any doubt, that actions had consequences when you crossed the wrong person. The planning took 2 years. Marcus built profiles of their weaknesses, mapped their social connections, and identified the pressure points that would cause maximum damage. He was patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless in his preparation. When Heather finally called him, 5 years after walking out of his life, Marcus was ready. Chapter 4: The Gathering Storm. 5 years of careful observation had taught Marcus everything he needed to know about his target's weaknesses. Linda had always been driven by social status and the approval of others. Without Marcus's wealth to maintain her position, she had gradually slipped down the social ladder, watching former friends distance themselves as her circumstances became more modest. Christian's weakness was his ego. The golden boy who had never faced real failure was drowning in a series of professional and personal setbacks. Every rejection, every closed door, was a fresh wound to his inflated self-image. Heather's vulnerability was more complex. She had inherited her father's intelligence, but her mother's entitlement. She genuinely believed that her Stanford education and her last name should guarantee her success, and reality's refusal to cooperate left her frustrated and increasingly desperate. Marcus had built his revenge strategy around these psychological profiles, but he needed more than theoretical knowledge. He needed current intelligence, real-time information about their daily lives, their relationships, and their hopes. For this, he turned to Eric Ross, a former Special Forces operator who had transitioned into private investigation work. Eric was 34, methodical, and completely without sentiment when it came to gathering information. Marcus had used his services occasionally for business matters, but this assignment was personal. "I need comprehensive surveillance on 3 individuals," Marcus had explained during a meeting in a downtown Seattle coffee shop. "I want to know their routines, their associates, their financial situations, and their vulnerabilities. Nothing illegal, but everything observable." Eric had reviewed the files Marcus provided: photographs, last known addresses, employment information. "These people hurt you personally. They betrayed my trust," Marcus had replied. "I want to understand exactly how they're living now." The surveillance reports that arrived every 2 weeks painted a picture of 3 lives slowly unraveling. Linda was working for a mid-tier real estate agency, selling suburban homes to middle-class families. Her income was inconsistent, depending on market conditions and her ability to charm clients who were much less impressed by her style than her previous social circle had been. She was dating a divorced accountant named Alan Donahue, a decent man who made a comfortable but unspectacular living. Alan was kind to her, patient with her occasional outbursts about her previous life, and genuinely interested in building a stable relationship. Linda seemed to appreciate his stability while privately resenting the compromise he represented. Christian's situation was more volatile. After his family's investment firm collapsed, he had been forced to take progressively lower-level positions. His current job was with a small financial planning company that served middle-class clients, a significant step down from the high-stakes investment world he had expected to inherit. He was living in a one-bedroom apartment that cost more than he could comfortably afford, maintaining appearances while accumulating credit card debt. His social life consisted mainly of networking events where he tried to convince former associates to give him opportunities that never materialized. Heather's circumstances were perhaps the most frustrating for her. Her Stanford MBA should have opened doors, but her lack of real work experience and her tendency to expect rapid advancement had made her unemployable at the level she demanded. She was currently working as a marketing coordinator for a small consulting firm, making barely enough to cover her student loans and basic living expenses. She was living with her mother, a situation that created constant tension. Two strong-willed women who had conspired together but now blamed each other for their reduced circumstances. But Marcus wasn't content with simply observing their decline. He wanted to accelerate it. His first move was subtle but devastating. Marcus had maintained contacts throughout the business community, relationships built over decades of successful consulting work. A word here, a suggestion there, and Linda found her best potential clients suddenly canceling appointments or choosing other agents. Christian's job search became mysteriously more difficult. References that should have been positive became neutrally professional. Interviews that should have led to offers resulted in polite rejections. Nothing traceable, nothing that could be challenged, but a consistent pattern of doors closing just as they seemed about to open. Heather's career advancement stalled when her attempts to network at industry events consistently failed to produce the connections she needed. The young professionals she tried to befriend already seemed to have unfavorable impressions of her, based on information from sources they couldn't quite remember. Marcus orchestrated these setbacks through a network of business contacts who owed him favors or respected his judgment. He never asked anyone to do anything illegal or explicitly harmful. He simply shared his professional opinion that these individuals might not be the best investments of time or trust. The psychological pressure began to show in their behavior. Linda's relationship with Alan became strained as her frustration and bitterness affected her mood. Christian started drinking more, attending fewer networking events, and showing signs of clinical depression. Heather's resentment toward her mother intensified as their living situation became more claustrophobic. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with their gradual decline. He wanted them to face a crisis that would strip away their remaining pretenses and force them to confront the full consequences of their choices. The opportunity came when Eric's surveillance revealed that Linda was having serious financial problems. Her real estate commissions had dropped dramatically, and she was behind on her rent. Christian was struggling with credit card payments and had been forced to take a second job delivering food on weekends. Heather was barely managing her expenses and had applied for several credit cards to supplement her income. Marcus decided it was time to apply direct pressure. Through a series of carefully orchestrated financial maneuvers, Marcus ensured that all three of them faced simultaneous crises. Linda's landlord, who happened to owe Marcus a favor from a previous business arrangement, suddenly decided to sell the property, requiring all tenants to move within 60 days. Christian's credit card companies, influenced by information about his employment instability, simultaneously reduced his credit limits and demanded immediate payments on outstanding balances. Heather's student loan servicer, acting on concerns about her payment history, accelerated the repayment schedule. Within 2 weeks, all three were facing financial emergencies that threatened to destroy their remaining stability. They had nowhere to turn except to the relationships they had left, relationships they had poisoned with their betrayal. Marcus knew that desperation would force them to make mistakes, to reveal their true character under pressure. And he knew that when they finally reached out for help, they would discover exactly how thoroughly he had prepared for their surrender. Chapter 5. The Trap Titans. The call came on a Tuesday evening as Marcus was reviewing quarterly reports in his Seattle office. Sandra was working late on a case, and the building was quiet except for the hum of climate control and the distant sound of traffic 42 floors below. "Mr. Weiss? This is Heather." Marcus had been expecting this call for months, but hearing his daughter's voice still sent a complex mix of emotions through his chest. Anger, disappointment, and something that might have been sadness if he had allowed himself to feel it fully. "I'm sorry," Marcus replied, his tone professionally neutral. "I think you have the wrong number." "Daddy, please. I know you're angry with me, but I need help. We all need help." Marcus set down his pen and activated the recording function on his phone, a device that automatically documented all calls for security purposes. "I'm afraid I don't have a daughter. Perhaps you're looking for someone else." "Don't do this." Heather's voice cracked with desperation. "I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you. But we're in serious trouble, and you're the only person who can help us." "Ms. Robertson," Marcus said, using her married name with deliberate precision. "I don't know what situation you're referring to, but I'm not in the business of helping strangers with their personal problems." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Marcus could hear Heather breathing, could almost feel her psychological calculation as she tried to find the words that would reach him. "They're going to evict Mom," she finally said. "Christian lost his job last week. I can't make my loan payments. We don't have anywhere else to turn." "I'm sorry to hear about your difficulties," Marcus replied. "I suggest you contact local social services or charitable organizations. They're better equipped to help people in your circumstances." "Daddy, please." Marcus ended the call. For 5 minutes, he sat in his chair, staring out at the city lights. Then he opened his secure laptop and began reviewing the intelligence reports Eric had compiled over the past month. The financial pressure he had orchestrated was working exactly as planned. All three of them were facing simultaneous crises that threatened their basic security. Linda's eviction notice was real. The property sale Marcus had arranged was proceeding on schedule. Christian's job loss was also genuine, though it had been accelerated by unfavorable references from previous employers who had been subtly influenced by Marcus's network. Heather's loan situation was the result of accurate reporting about her employment status and payment history. Nothing Marcus had done was illegal. He had simply ensured that reality caught up with their circumstances more quickly than it might have otherwise. The second call came 3 days later. This time it was Linda. "Marcus, I know you don't want to talk to me, but this is about our daughter." "I don't have a daughter," Marcus replied. "And I don't know anyone named Linda." "Stop playing games." Linda's voice was sharp with desperation and anger. "Heather is going to lose her apartment. Christian is having panic attacks. We made mistakes, but we don't deserve this." "Ma'am, I think you have me confused with someone else. I've never been married, and I don't have children." "You bastard," Linda whispered. "You cruel, vindictive bastard. We're sorry, okay? We're sorry for what we did. But we're drowning here, and you're the only one who can throw us a rope." "I'm afraid I can't help with whatever situation you're describing," Marcus said. "I recommend consulting with a financial advisor or family counselor. Your daughter is going to end up homeless." "I don't have a daughter," Marcus repeated and ended the call. The third call was from Christian, and Marcus was almost impressed by the young man's audacity. "Mr. Weiss, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I'm calling about Heather. I'm sorry, but I don't know anyone named Heather. Are you sure you have the right number?" "Cut the crap, Marcus. We both know you're behind what's happening to us. The job rejections, the financial problems, the eviction. It's too coordinated to be coincidence." Marcus smiled for the first time in days. Christian was smarter than he had given him credit for. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. Are you suggesting that I'm somehow responsible for your employment difficulties? That seems like a rather paranoid perspective." "You're destroying us," Christian said, "systematically and deliberately. And you're using Heather to hurt Linda and me." "Sir, I think you may be experiencing some psychological difficulties. Believing that a stranger is orchestrating a conspiracy against you suggests you might benefit from professional help." "She's your daughter," Christian shouted. "Whatever you think about Linda and me, Heather is your blood." "I don't have children," Marcus said calmly. I suggest you focus on addressing your apparent financial and employment problems through legal and appropriate channels. After ending that call, Marcus poured himself a scotch and reviewed his strategy. The psychological pressure was building exactly as he had planned. They were isolated, desperate, and beginning to turn on each other as their stress increased. Eric's latest reports confirmed the breakdown. Linda and Heather were fighting constantly, their shared apartment becoming a pressure cooker of mutual blame and resentment. Christian was drinking heavily and had been seen arguing with Linda in public. The unity they had shown during their betrayal was cracking under the weight of consequences. But Marcus wanted more than their discomfort. He wanted them to understand the full scope of what they had lost and what they had chosen. He wanted them to face the reality that actions had consequences and that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. The final phase of his plan required them to be completely desperate. And according to Eric's surveillance, they were almost there. Heather's second call came 2 weeks later, and this time her voice was barely above a whisper. "Daddy, I'm scared. I don't know what to do anymore." Marcus almost broke character. Almost. But then he remembered the photographs of Linda and Christian together, the recorded conversations about using his love against him, the way Heather had conspired with her mother to profit from their betrayal. "You have the wrong number," he said, and hung up. When the phone rang again immediately, Marcus let it go to voicemail. And again, and again. That evening, Sandra found him in his home office, staring at his computer screen. "Rough day?" she asked, setting a cup of coffee beside his keyboard. "The past catching up," Marcus replied. He had told Sandra about his previous marriage and the circumstances of his divorce, though not about his ongoing revenge campaign. She knew about the betrayal but assumed he had moved past it. "Sometimes the past needs to stay buried," Sandra observed, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Especially when dwelling on it starts affecting the present." Marcus looked at his wife, his real wife, the woman who had earned his trust through consistency and honesty. "What if someone hurt you the way they hurt me? What would you want me to do?" Sandra considered the question seriously. "I would want you to protect yourself and build something better. I wouldn't want you to waste years of your life on revenge. Even if they never faced consequences, even if they got to live their lives as if what they did didn't matter." "Especially then," Sandra said, "because living well is the best revenge. And because trying to destroy other people usually destroys something in you too." Marcus nodded, but he didn't agree. Some betrayals required consequences. Some people needed to learn that actions had prices. And some wounds could only heal after justice was served. The trap was set. All that remained was waiting for them to walk into it. Chapter 6. The Reckoning Begins. The emergency call from Heather came at 2:17 a.m. on a Friday night, 3 days after Marcus had received reports that all 3 of his targets were facing their final deadlines. Linda's eviction was scheduled for Monday morning. Christian's credit card companies were demanding immediate payment or legal action. Heather's student loan default would trigger wage garnishment and destroy her credit rating. "Daddy, please," Heather sobbed into the phone. "Mom collapsed at work today. They think it's stress-related, but we can't afford the hospital bills. Christian is talking about doing something desperate. I'm scared we're going to lose everything." Marcus was wide awake instantly, though he kept his voice neutral. "I'm sorry, but you have the wrong number." "Don't hang up," Heather screamed. "I know what we did was unforgivable. I know we destroyed everything. But Mom might die, and I don't know what to do." Marcus ended the call and immediately dialed Eric Ross. "Status report," Marcus said when Eric answered. "Linda Saunders collapsed during a client meeting this afternoon. Ambulance took her to Mercy General. Heather and Christian are both at the hospital now. Christian's been drinking heavily and making statements about ending this one way or another." "What kind of statements?" "Talking about confronting you directly. He's desperate enough to be dangerous, Marcus. I think you need to consider that this might be escalating beyond financial pressure." Marcus absorbed this information calmly. He had always known that cornering desperate people carried risks. But he also knew that Christian Robertson was fundamentally a coward who preferred manipulation to direct confrontation. "Continue monitoring. Let me know if they make any moves toward Seattle." "Marcus." Eric's voice carried a note of concern. "Whatever they did to you, sending someone to the hospital might be crossing a line." "She collapsed from stress," Marcus replied. "Stress caused by the natural consequences of her choices. I didn't put her in that hospital. Her conscience did." After ending the call, Marcus sat in his darkened bedroom, listening to Sandra's quiet breathing beside him. His wife slept peacefully, trusting in his presence and their shared life. She had no idea that he was orchestrating the destruction of 3 people who had once shared his name and his love. The next morning brought news that Linda had been treated for exhaustion and anxiety, then released with a prescription for medication she couldn't afford and instructions to reduce stress in her life. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The woman who had destroyed his peace of mind was now suffering from the same condition. But her hospitalization had created an opportunity Marcus hadn't anticipated. According to Eric's surveillance, the medical bills and lost work time had pushed their financial crisis to a breaking point. They had less than 72 hours to find solutions or face complete destitution. Saturday evening, Marcus received a text message from an unknown number. "We're coming to Seattle. You can either help us or watch us destroy ourselves. Your choice." The message was from Christian, and it confirmed Marcus's assessment of the young man's character. Even in desperation, Christian was trying to manipulate the situation to present Marcus with false choices designed to make him feel responsible for whatever happened next. Marcus forwarded the message to Eric with instructions to monitor airports and bus stations. If they were coming to Seattle, he wanted advance warning of their arrival. Sunday afternoon, Sandra was working in their home garden when she noticed Marcus standing at the living room window, watching the street. "Expecting someone?" she asked, joining him inside. "Possibly," Marcus replied. "Some people from my past might be arriving soon." Sandra studied his face, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his hands were clasped behind his back. "The ex-wife and daughter you told me about, among others." "Marcus, what exactly is going on? You've been different these past few weeks. More distant. More calculating." Marcus turned to face his wife, seeing genuine concern in her eyes. Sandra deserved honesty, or at least as much honesty as he could safely share. "They betrayed me in ways that went beyond simple adultery," he said. "They conspired to destroy my family and steal my assets. For 5 years, I've been ensuring that their actions had appropriate consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "Nothing illegal. Nothing directly harmful. But I've made sure that reality caught up with their poor decisions." Sandra absorbed this revelation slowly. "You've been orchestrating revenge for 5 years. I've been ensuring justice," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because it sounds like you've been playing God with people's lives." Before Marcus could respond, Eric called with an update. "They're here. All 3 of them. Rented a car at Seattle-Tacoma and drove straight to your address. They're parked across the street, apparently working up the courage to approach your house." Marcus looked out the window and saw them, a beat-up sedan with 3 figures inside, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. Linda in the passenger seat, looking older and more fragile than he remembered. Christian behind the wheel, his shoulders rigid with desperation. Heather in the back seat, probably preparing the words she hoped would reach her father's heart. "What do you want me to do?" Sandra asked, having overheard enough of the conversation to understand the situation. "Go upstairs," Marcus said. "Whatever happens, don't come down until I tell you it's safe." "Marcus, please." His voice carried a note of command that Sandra had never heard before. "Trust me and go upstairs." Sandra hesitated, then kissed his cheek and headed for the stairs. "Be careful," she said. "Whatever they did, be careful that your revenge doesn't cost you who you are." Alone in his living room, Marcus watched the car across the street and waited. He had spent 5 years planning for this moment, preparing for the confrontation that would finally settle the accounts between them. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 p.m. Marcus walked to the front door, straightened his shoulders, and prepared to face the people who had destroyed his previous life. They had come seeking mercy, forgiveness, and rescue from the consequences of their choices. They were about to discover that Marcus Weiss no longer offered any of those things. Chapter 7. The door opens. Marcus Weiss opened his front door with the same calm precision he brought to every important moment in his life. On his doorstep stood 3 people who had once been the center of his world, now reduced to desperate strangers begging for salvation they didn't deserve. Heather looked awful. 5 years of disappointment and stress had aged her beyond her 31 years. Her Stanford confidence had been replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of someone who had finally learned that the world didn't owe her anything. Her clothes were clean but cheap, her hair needed professional attention she couldn't afford, and her hands shook slightly as she prepared to speak. Behind her stood Linda and Christian, and the sight of them together still triggered something cold and furious in Marcus's chest. Linda looked fragile in a way that might have evoked sympathy if Marcus hadn't known how calculated her vulnerability could be. Christian stood slightly behind her, his designer clothes now looking worn and outdated, his practiced charm replaced by barely concealed desperation. "Daddy," Heather began, her voice breaking on the word. "Thank you for—" "I'm sorry," Marcus interrupted, his tone politely confused. "I think you have me confused with someone else. Who are you looking for?" The effect was immediate and devastating. Heather's face crumpled as if she had been physically struck. Linda stepped forward, her eyes flashing with the anger that had always lurked beneath her polished surface. "Stop this charade, Marcus," Linda snapped. "We know you've been destroying our lives systematically. We know you're behind every closed door, every rejected application, every financial disaster. Just stop pretending you don't know us and tell us what you want." Marcus studied her with the same detached interest he might show a particularly interesting specimen. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. Are you suggesting that I'm somehow responsible for your personal difficulties? That seems like a rather paranoid delusion." "You bastard," Christian said, pushing past Linda. "You've been playing games with us for years. Pulling strings, manipulating situations, making sure we fail at everything we try. And now you're going to stand there and pretend you don't even know who we are." "Sir, I think you may be suffering from some kind of mental health crisis," Marcus replied, his voice filled with professional concern. "Believing that strangers are conspiring against you is a common symptom of paranoid psychosis. I recommend you seek immediate psychiatric evaluation." "We're not strangers," Heather screamed, her composure finally breaking completely. "I'm your daughter. She's your wife of 28 years. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence that would define Christian's role in their family's destruction. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if trying to place a vaguely familiar face. "I'm sorry, but I think you're confusing me with someone else. I've never been married, and I don't have any children." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus watched as the full implications of his denial sank in. They had come seeking forgiveness, reconciliation, or at least acknowledgement of their shared history. Instead, they were discovering that they had been erased from his life so completely that he refused to admit they had ever existed. "This is impossible," Linda whispered. "You can't just pretend we never happened." "I'm not pretending anything," Marcus replied. "I genuinely don't know who you people are or why you think I should help you with whatever problems you're facing." Christian's face was flushed with anger and alcohol. "You're doing this because of the affair. Because Linda and I—" "I'm sorry," Marcus interrupted, "but I don't know what affair you're referring to. Are you saying that you and this woman have been having an extramarital relationship? That's unfortunate for your respective spouses, but I don't see how it concerns me." "Because she was married to you," Christian shouted. "Because I was married to your daughter. Because we destroyed your family, and now you're destroying ours." Marcus shook his head sadly. "Sir, I really think you need professional help. The delusions you're experiencing seem quite severe." "Show him the pictures," Heather said desperately, pulling out her phone. "Show him the wedding photos, the family vacations, anything that proves we're connected." Linda fumbled with her purse, extracting a wallet-sized photo of Heather's wedding day. The day Marcus had paid $80,000 to watch his daughter marry the man who was already sleeping with his wife. "Look," Linda said, holding up the photograph. "This is our daughter's wedding. You walked her down the aisle. You gave the toast at the reception. You told her you loved her and wanted her to be happy." Marcus examined the photograph with mild interest. "That's a lovely wedding photo," he said. "The bride is quite beautiful, but I'm afraid I don't recognize anyone in the picture." "You're in the picture," Heather sobbed. "Right there, walking me down the aisle." Marcus looked more closely at the image, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, but that's not me. Perhaps there's a resemblance, but I've never attended that wedding." The psychological impact was exactly what Marcus had intended. By refusing to acknowledge their shared past, he was forcing them to confront the possibility that their relationship with him had been so thoroughly severed that it might as well have never existed. "Please," Heather whispered, all her fight drained away. "We're sorry. We know what we did was wrong. We know we hurt you. But we're drowning, and you're the only person who can save us." "Miss," Marcus said gently, "I understand that you're in distress, but I'm not the person you're looking for. Whatever relationship you think we had, whatever help you think I can provide, you're mistaken. I'll get on my knees, Linda said, her voice breaking. I'll beg. I'll admit everything we did was wrong and terrible. Just please, don't let us lose everything. Ma'am, I don't know what you think you did wrong, but your personal problems aren't my responsibility. They're your family, Christian screamed, losing the last of his self-control. Whatever you think about Linda and me, Heather is your blood. She doesn't deserve to be punished for our mistakes. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of finality that made all three of them step back. I don't have a family, he said. I never had a family, and I don't know any of you. As if summoned by his words, Sandra appeared behind him in the doorway. She was dressed elegantly, her presence radiating the confidence and contentment of a woman who was truly loved and valued. Darling, Sandra said, slipping her arm through Marcus's, is everything all right? These people seem upset. Just some confused individuals who think they know me, Marcus replied, his voice warming noticeably as he looked at his wife. I was just explaining that they have the wrong person. Heather stared at Sandra with naked shock. Who is she? This is my wife, Sandra, Marcus said, his pride evident. The only woman I've ever married, and the only family I've ever had. The introduction hit them like a physical blow. Linda staggered slightly, Christian's face went white, and Heather made a sound like a wounded animal. Your wife? Linda whispered. Yes, Marcus replied. We've been married for 3 years. Sandra is a forensic accountant, brilliant at her work, and the most honest person I've ever known. Sandra smiled politely at the three strangers. I'm sorry you're having difficulties, but I think there's been some misunderstanding. Marcus has never mentioned knowing any of you. Because we don't know them, Marcus confirmed. Now, if you'll excuse us, we were about to have dinner. He began to close the door, but Heather threw herself forward, pressing her hand against the wood. Wait, she cried. Please, just listen. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Marcus said firmly. If you continue to harass us, I'll be forced to call the police. We're not harassing you, Heather sobbed. We're trying to reach someone who used to love us. Marcus looked at her with what appeared to be genuine confusion. Miss, I don't know what delusion you're suffering from, but I've never loved you. I've never even met you before today. He closed the door firmly, leaving them standing on his doorstep in the gathering darkness. Through the window, Marcus watched as they stood in stunned silence for several minutes. Then Heather collapsed against Christian, sobbing uncontrollably. Linda stared at the closed door as if she could will it to open through sheer force of desperation. Finally, they walked back to their rental car and drove away. Who were they really? Sandra asked as they watched the taillights disappear down the street. Ghosts, Marcus replied. Just ghosts from a life that never really existed. But as he said the words, Marcus knew that the evening's confrontation was just the beginning. They would be back, more desperate than before, and next time they might not accept his denial so easily. The final phase of his revenge was about to begin. Chapter 8. The Perfect Storm. The hotel room was a testament to their desperation. A cheap roadside motel where the wallpaper was peeling and the carpet smelled of decades of disappointment. Heather sat on one of the twin beds, staring at her phone as if it might somehow conjure a solution to their impossible situation. Linda paced the narrow space between the beds and the bathroom, her agitation growing with each step. Christian had been drinking steadily from a bottle of whiskey purchased at a gas station, his usual calculated demeanor replaced by something raw and dangerous. He knows, Christian said, his words slightly slurred. He knows exactly who we are and what we did. That whole performance was psychological torture. Of course he knows, Linda snapped. The question is what we do about it. We go back, Heather said quietly. We keep going back until he listens to us. Did you see his face? Linda turned on her daughter with fury that had been building for hours. Did you see how he looked at that woman? Like she was precious. Like she was worth protecting. Because she is, Heather replied, her voice hollow. She's everything we're not. Honest. Loyal. Everything we destroyed in ourselves when we decided to betray him. Christian lurched to his feet, swaying slightly. Screw his moral superiority. We made mistakes, but he's been systematically destroying our lives for 5 years. That's not justice. That's sadism. What did you expect? Heather asked. Did you think he would just forgive us? Did you think we could betray him and then come back when it was convenient for us? I expected him to be human, Christian shouted. I expected him to have some basic compassion for his own daughter. I'm not his daughter anymore, Heather said, the words coming out like broken glass. I gave up that right when I chose Mom's money over Dad's trust. The silence that followed was heavy with truths none of them wanted to acknowledge. They had all made choices, calculated decisions based on selfishness and short-term gain. Now they were facing the long-term consequences, and the man they had wronged was refusing to make their suffering easier to bear. There has to be something, Linda said, resuming her pacing. Some way to reach him. Some pressure point we can use. What are you suggesting? Heather asked. I don't know. His business, his reputation, his new wife, something he cares about that we can threaten. Christian nodded. The alcohol making him more aggressive than strategic. We have evidence of his revenge campaign. The coordinated job rejections, the financial pressure, the manipulation. We could expose him. With what proof? Heather challenged. He's been too smart to leave direct evidence. Everything he's done could be explained as coincidence or market forces. Then we make it direct, Christian said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. We force him to acknowledge us. What does that mean? Christian took another drink from the bottle. It means we stop being polite. We stop accepting his lies. We make him face what he's done to us. Linda stopped pacing, studying Christian's face. You're talking about something illegal. I'm talking about survival, Christian replied. We're already destroyed. What's the worst that could happen? Heather felt something cold settle in her stomach. She recognized the look in Christian's eyes, the same reckless desperation that had led to their affair, the same willingness to destroy everything in pursuit of immediate gratification. No, she said firmly. Whatever you're thinking, no. You don't get to be noble now, Christian snarled. You're just as guilty as we are. You conspired with your mother to profit from the betrayal. You're just as responsible for this mess. That's exactly why I won't make it worse, Heather replied. We've already lost our souls. I won't lose what's left of my humanity too. Christian laughed bitterly. Your humanity? You think you still have humanity left? You destroyed your father's life and conspired to steal his assets. You're already damned. The words hit Heather like physical blows, but she didn't flinch. Maybe, but I'm not going to compound it by threatening innocent people. She's not innocent, Linda said quietly. His new wife. She's living in the house that should have been mine, sleeping in the bed that should have been mine, enjoying the life that should have been mine. She didn't steal anything from you, Heather said. You threw it away. We all threw it away. Shut up, Linda screamed, her composure finally cracking completely. Just shut up with your self-righteous guilt. I'm tired of your constant remorse. I'm tired of pretending that what we did was worse than what he's doing to us. What we did was worse, Heather said simply. We betrayed someone who loved us. He's just making sure we face the consequences. Christian finished the whiskey and threw the empty bottle against the wall, where it shattered with a sound like breaking promises. Consequences, he repeated mockingly. You sound like him. Cold. Calculating. Ready to sacrifice people for principles. Maybe that's what I learned from him, Heather replied. Maybe that's the only inheritance I have left. The room fell silent except for the sound of traffic outside and the distant noise of other guests in their own desperate circumstances. Three people who had once been united in their selfishness now found themselves isolated even from each other. Finally, Linda spoke, her voice hollow but determined. We go back tomorrow, all of us together. And this time, we don't leave until he acknowledges what he's done. What if he calls the police? Heather asked. Then we tell them the truth, Christian said. About his systematic revenge campaign. About how he's been manipulating our lives for years. Let's see how his perfect reputation handles public scrutiny. And if that destroys his business and his marriage. Heather challenged. Linda's smile was cold and empty. Then he'll know exactly how we feel. But as they made their plans for the next day's confrontation, none of them realized that Marcus Weiss had anticipated their desperation. He had prepared for this moment, orchestrated it even, and their final desperate gambit would only complete the trap he had been building for 5 years. The last phase of his revenge was about to begin, and it would be more thorough and devastating than anything they had imagined. Chapter 9, The Last Laugh. Marcus Weiss stood in his living room at 7 a.m., watching the rental car park across the street from his house for the second time in 2 days. He had been awake since 5:30, reviewing his final preparations and ensuring that every detail of his endgame was perfectly arranged. Sandra was already at work, having left early for a client meeting that would keep her downtown until evening. Marcus had suggested the timing, claiming he needed the day to handle some unpleasant business matters. She had kissed him goodbye, trusting as always that he would handle whatever needed to be done. This time, they didn't ring the doorbell. Christian climbed over the front gate, his face set with the kind of desperate determination that had probably kept him awake all night. Linda and Heather followed, all three of them moving with the purposeful stride of people who had nothing left to lose. Marcus opened the door before they could knock. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "I was wondering when you'd be back." The casual admission stopped them cold. After yesterday's performance, they had expected more denials, more psychological games. Instead, Marcus seemed almost welcoming. "You know who we are," Linda said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "Of course I know who you are," Marcus replied. "I've always known who you are. The question is whether you know who you are." He stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. "Please, come in. We have a lot to discuss." They hesitated, sensing a trap, but too desperate to retreat. Finally, Heather stepped through the doorway, followed reluctantly by her mother and Christian. Marcus led them to his living room, the same room where Sandra had stood beside him the previous evening, where his new life existed in perfect counterpoint to the wreckage of his old one. The contrast was deliberate and devastating. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every photograph spoke of success, stability, and genuine happiness. "Please sit," Marcus said, settling into his own chair with the relaxed confidence of a man in complete control of his environment. "Are you going to help us?" Heather asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Help you with what?" Marcus replied. "Your financial problems? Your employment difficulties? Your general inability to function as decent human beings?" "All of it," Linda said desperately. "We need money. We need work. We need—" "You need consequences," Marcus interrupted. "And I've been providing them for 5 years." The admission hung in the air like a confession and a threat simultaneously. After years of denying involvement, Marcus was finally acknowledging his role in their destruction. "So you admit it," Christian said, trying to summon some of his old aggression. "You've been manipulating our lives, destroying our opportunities, engineering our failures." "I've been ensuring that reality caught up with your choices," Marcus corrected. "Nothing I did was illegal. Nothing I did was even particularly creative. I simply made sure that your natural consequences weren't softened by luck or the charity of others." "You destroyed us," Linda whispered. "No," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You destroyed yourselves. I just made sure you couldn't escape the wreckage." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick manila envelope, setting it on the coffee table between them. "But I'm a fair man. I believe in offering people choices, even when they don't deserve them." Heather stared at the envelope as if it might contain salvation or damnation in equal measure. "What is it?" "Documentation," Marcus replied. "Comprehensive evidence of every conversation you had during your affair, every plan you made to defraud me during the divorce, every scheme you concocted to profit from your betrayal." He opened the envelope and spread photographs across the table, images of Linda and Christian entering hotels, transcripts of their recorded conversations, financial documents showing their coordinated deception. 5 years of investigation, Marcus continued. Every lie cataloged, every manipulation documented, every betrayal preserved for posterity. Christian's face went white as he recognized the scope of the surveillance. "This is illegal. Recording private conversations, unauthorized photography." "All legal," Marcus interrupted. "Conducted by licensed investigators in public spaces or with appropriate warrants. I've been very careful to ensure that everything was done properly." "What do you want?" Linda asked, her voice hollow with defeat. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since their reunion, they saw something genuinely terrifying in his expression. "I want you to understand the difference between justice and mercy. I want you to comprehend the full scope of what you lost when you chose betrayal over loyalty." He gestured toward the photographs. "This evidence could destroy what's left of your reputations permanently. Your families, your friends, your professional contacts. Everyone who still believes you might be decent people could learn exactly what you're capable of." "You're blackmailing us," Heather said. "I'm offering you a choice," Marcus corrected. The same choice you offered me 5 years ago, when you decided that my love and trust were worthless compared to your immediate gratification. He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked his perfectly manicured yard. You can continue trying to rebuild your lives, knowing that I'll be watching every step, ensuring that your past follows you wherever you go. Or what? Christian demanded. Marcus turned back to face them, his expression completely calm. Or you can disappear, leave the country, change your identities, start over somewhere that your history can't follow you. We don't have money for that, Linda protested. I do, Marcus replied. I'll provide each of you with $50,000 in assistance in relocating to countries without extradition treaties. You can start fresh, build new lives, become different people. The offer was so unexpected that none of them could immediately respond. After 5 years of systematic destruction, Marcus was offering them an escape route. What's the catch? Heather asked. No catch, Marcus replied. Just conditions. You leave immediately. You never contact anyone from your previous lives again. You never use your real names again. And you never, under any circumstances, return to the United States. You're exiling us, Linda whispered. I'm offering you a chance to avoid the complete destruction of your remaining dignity, Marcus corrected. Take the money and disappear, or stay and face the consequences of everything you've done. Christian was studying the photographs, his face cycling through anger, fear, and calculation. And if we refuse? Marcus returned to his chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes cold. Then I release everything. Every newspaper, every social media platform, every person who's ever known you gets to see exactly what you're capable of. Your affair, your conspiracies, your betrayals. All of it becomes public record. You'll destroy us completely, Heather said. You'll destroy yourselves completely, Marcus corrected. I'll just make sure everyone gets to watch. The silence stretched for several minutes as they absorbed the scope of their choice. Exile or exposure. Disappearance or public humiliation. Finally, Linda spoke, her voice broken and defeated. The money. How would you? Wire transfers to accounts in your destination countries, Marcus replied. Untraceable, immediate, and sufficient to establish new identities if you're careful with your spending. And you'd never see us again, Heather said, the words carrying the weight of finality. Never, Marcus confirmed. As far as I'm concerned, you died 5 years ago. This is just disposing of the bodies. Heather looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw something that chilled her to the bone. No anger, no hatred, no pain. Just cold, absolute indifference. She had become nothing to him, less than a stranger, less than a memory. I choose exile, she whispered. Linda and Christian exchanged glances, recognizing that they had no real choice at all. Staying meant complete social destruction and probably criminal charges. Leaving meant at least the possibility of rebuilding something resembling a life. We all choose exile, Linda said. Marcus nodded as if he had expected this outcome all along. Excellent. I'll have the arrangements made within 24 hours. I suggest you spend today deciding on your destinations and saying goodbye to anything you can't take with you. He stood up, collecting the photographs and returning them to the envelope. Consider this our final business transaction. You provide me with your permanent absence, and I provide you with the resources to disappear. As they prepared to leave, Heather turned back one last time. Do you feel better now? Does destroying us give you peace? Marcus considered the question seriously. I feel satisfied, he replied. Justice has been served, consequences have been imposed, and the people who betrayed my trust have learned that actions have prices. And Sandra? Heather asked. Does she know what kind of man she married? Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Sandra married a man who values loyalty above all else. A man who protects what matters to him and eliminates threats to his happiness. She understands exactly what kind of man I am. Heather nodded, finally understanding that her father, the man who had once read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bicycle, was gone forever. In his place stood someone harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Goodbye, Daddy, she whispered. Goodbye, stranger, Marcus replied. They left without another word, walking out of his life as completely as if they had never existed. Marcus watched from his window as their rental car disappeared down the street, carrying 3 ghosts away from the life they had forfeited through their own choices. That evening, Sandra returned home to find Marcus working in his study, reviewing business contracts as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "How was your day?" she asked, kissing the top of his head. "Productive," Marcus replied, pulling her into his lap. "I finished some old business that had been hanging over me for years." "Good business or bad business?" "Necessary business," Marcus said, holding her close and breathing in the scent of her hair. "The kind that lets you move forward without looking back." Sandra settled against him, trusting in his strength and his love. She didn't need to know the details of his past or the methods he used to protect their future. She only needed to know that he would never betray her trust the way others had betrayed his. Marcus Weiss had finally achieved perfect justice. The people who had destroyed his first family were gone forever, exiled to distant corners of the world where their past could never be undone, but where it could no longer poison his present. His revenge was complete, thorough, and absolute. And for the first time in 5 years, Marcus Weiss was truly at peace. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.